Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome back to episode 2 of this mini-series, which is mixing a live recording from scratch with no BS, no cutting corners, no replacing anything, no nothing. This series is about giving you guys a real-life glimpse as to what a live recording looks like straight out of the console into a DAW, and you're mixing on your own without overdubbing, without re-recording anything, without adding any drum samples, without adding anything that's relatively cheating, in my opinion, to enhance the recording. This is raw, straight from the console, and we're gonna mix it in our DAW in a studio environment to get the best sound possible. So where we left off, let's switch over to Logic right here and see where we're at. As you can see, I did a little bit of editing off camera. So what I did was, in the last episode, I talked to you about removing the cymbal bleed from the stage right and stage left vocal. I just went ahead and did that. And there was actually a commenter, I think his name was, Mash Smash. So shouts to you in the comments of the other video. You suggested time aligning the drums a little differently. And this is completely transparent, this mix series. I made it very clear when I first started this, and I showed you guys, you're gonna see every decision I make, whether it's the correct decision, the wrong decision, not what you may have done. Oh, I didn't think of that. It's all of those. That's what this video series is about. This is a real life glimpse as to what a real mix engineer goes through while mixing a session. And a lot of mix YouTubers I see do a lot of, pre-mixing, they do a lot of pre-taping, they do a lot of producing. Like one of my favorite YouTubers, I'll give you a prime example. His name's Graham, and he runs a channel called The Recording Revolution. I learned a lot from him. So shouts to Graham. I love his channel, I love his content. But what he does in a lot of his live recordings is overdub his recordings. So his vocal track, he re-records them in a studio. And to me, that's just cheating. A live performance is supposed to be a live performance. So any mess up, any crack in the voice, all the cymbal bleed, all the bleed from the other instruments, that's part of the recording. But that's just me, that's just how I work, and that's just how I prefer. You may disagree, you may agree, and that's your prerogative. You're allowed to agree or disagree with me. But anyway, enough stalling. Let's get to Logic here. And let's talk about what we have so far. To go back to Smash, I probably butchered your name. He suggested that I realign the drums, and he is correct. I want to give it credit where credit's due. What I did off camera was realign the toms and the snare so that they aligned when the toms were hitting and the snare wasn't. So now all the drums are a little nice, more and even. And this is an accidental discovery. So you know how the center vocal right here has a lot of cymbal bleed? Go to another song. What else can you hear a lot of bleed of in that track? His guitar. So, and this is a little crazy what I did here. I did an alignment sending his vocal track and aligned it with his guitar. And just listen to the results that you're going to get here. So this is without the auto align on the guitar. Sounds fine, right? But when I put the alignment on, suddenly all of that attack and that high end just cuts right through everything. So again, I'll do a quick change up because with auto line, if I turn it off while it's playing, it'll just get delayed and it'll like cancel the phase out. So I'm going to do the fastest switching I possibly can. So you'll hear the difference. I'm going to switch with to it without and then put it back on. What a difference that makes. And since I'm not going to be deleting the cymbal bleed from the center vocal, I'm going to use that as the quote unquote overhead. I'm going to need as much help with phase cancellation and any other issues I find in the background audio of the center vocal. That is going to help greatly. Thank you to Smash in the comments. You gave me a very happy accident here. The drums sound great too, so I'm not too worried about the drums anymore. I also, one thing I did change off camera was I took off the noise gate on the snare. There were just a lot of areas in the songs where he was hitting his snare pretty hard, and then a little like in the bridges and the choruses sometime he went from ba 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 to on his snare. So I didn't want to delete that, and the noise gate was just really messing around with that. So on if this were like a studio track that I was doing, I would go track by track and just like literally to automation on the on that effect and just turn off automation. But this is a live performance. There are a lot of imperfections. Also, there is just enough acceptable hi-hat bleed in the snare mic. So now, without the noise gate on the snare drum, you can actually hear the hi-hat in the mix. So those are the only corrections that I did. Again, I took off the noise gate on the snare. I did auto align on the center vocal on his guitar that bled into the center vocal mic. So now his guitar cuts right through the mix. And I also realigned the drums. So now the toms are aligned with the snare, and I aligned them where the snare was being played and the toms weren't. So now the drums are aligned in that aspect. So everything's great now. So let's continue where we were. Let's go with the keyboards. So this is going to be a very, very easy track to mix. Keyboards are usually the easiest track in a mix to get sitting right, because they're just processed sounds. They're synthesizers. They have their own distinct spot on the frequency chart. You don't have to hunt for anything. Keyboards are the easiest instrument in a band to mix. So let's just get this over and done with. I'm going to EQ and compress the keyboards and just get this out of the way, so we don't have to essentially touch this track ever again. So I think before I do that, I'm going to put a multiband on it. So the best multiband that I've ever used is the FabFilter Pro MB, because it's a really amazing multiband compressor. You could do so much stuff with this. And what I hear in the keyboard is there is a lot of low end that's just like coming all the way up. So I need to isolate that. I need to contain that. And I don't want the low end of these keyboards to cut through the mix, and I don't want to muddy up the mix. So that's what I'm going to focus on. I think I had it right in the first guess of where it was. Let's keep it 4-1. Let's go a little bit harder of a knee. Look ahead. Around 5 milliseconds. Fast attack. Relatively fast release. I only want to contain the peaks. I don't want to squash it. And then let's just play with it. Same deal as before on the sub lows on this keyboard. Okay. I don't want to eliminate that tone. I don't want to like completely screw it over. I just want it contained. So let's see how that sounds in relation to everything else. Sounds fine. So, but now let's figure out a way to get the high end to cut through just a little bit so we hear a little bit more of the key strikes instead of just all the low end. Because as you can see on the frequency analyzer, again, this is why I have the multimeter living on the bottom right of my sessions. There's a reason why I have this here. It's so I hear with my ears, obviously, but I want to see where the high end is. So in case my ears are playing tricks on me, I have a visual reference too. Yeah, so it's all low end. So the low end's peaking like just a little below -30, and the high end is like -60. So we have room to boost the high end a little bit. So for general lift, I love the way the Slate Custom Series EQ does. It's very light and it's not that aggressive of an EQ, but it delivers a very nice sounding like boost when you put it up, especially around the 7K plus range. You're going to see it when I EQ the guitars. I use this EQ a lot of the times on guitars. So let's just let's screw with the keyboard and see what's what. Okay, I say that, we're going to have to go a little more aggressive with this. So there is an excellent API emulator EQ on this. Slate does pretty good as far as like emulating these vintage EQs. This is a lot more aggressive of an EQ. The way I like to mix EQ wise, I like to take away what I don't need in the infinity EQ, because I can do precision reductions here. And I like to boost with these analog EQs because I love the way that the saturation is added to the source. And if I boost just slightly, it makes a hell of a difference. There's still a lot of low end bleeding through that. I don't want to just be more aggressive with the multiband. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this through the LA2A mod that Slate did. And this is a fantastic, like if you ever used a real LA2A, you know just how amazing this thing sounds on acoustic guitar, vocals. Like you could put anything on this and it will sound fantastic. So again, Slate does a really good job with modding all these vintage EQs and compressors. So, and this is no different. I'm just gonna use this as an overall, just a little bit of a compression. I'm going for maybe 3 dB max of gain reduction. Now let's hear how that sounds in relation to the song. So you saw me hitting the dim switch here just to lower it because I'm mixing at a pretty loud volume. Like I said in the previous video, you want the music that you're mixing at loud volume be a little bit more than your loud projection speaking voice. You want to be able to just barely hear yourself talk over the music. That's relatively where you want to be if you're mixing loud. But if you want to get the fine details and really hear like the high end clearly, you want to mix low, and that's what the dim switch does on at least this interface. You can always just lower your master fader about 6 to 10 dB, and it'll do the same thing. But this sounds okay now. Yeah, this sounds fine. I'm not going to add any reverb to the keys because the keys already have a reverb on it. I don't want to add too much wet reverb to it. Otherwise, it'll lose its finesse. So I think the keyboards are basically done. I may put like another EQ on it depending on how the rest of the mix goes. So for now, let's get the low end taken care of. I'm not going to put a reverb on the bass, obviously. I'm not going to put a reverb on the kick drum, obviously. So let's get the low end in sync. I want to tackle the low end, and then I'll tackle the guitars, which, to be honest, not a lot of things I got to do to the guitar. So, like I said in the previous video, you want to do 3 things to your kick and your bass to have perfect low end. When you first start out, you want to have the kick drum play, and you're going to see the RMS on your frequency analyzer. Figure out where the peak of the foundation frequency is, and then match that to the bass. Find the bass's like defining frequency, which is roughly around 125 hertz. Match that with the kick drum as far as RMS level go, and you'll be about 75 to 80% of the way there. Next, you are going to do what we're going to do right here. We're going to do steps 2 and 3 with getting the kick and the bass to sync up together pretty well. All we did was EQ the bass. So what I'm going to do now is compress the bass and get the bass guitar sitting right. And like I said in the previous video, you want to have, for rock and metal, you want your bass to have a nice, even, consistent volume. You don't want the bass to go up and down in volume. Maybe in other genres of music, but not rock and metal. So here's what we're going to do with the bass. I'm going to get that done first, and then we'll focus on the kick drum. Stand through. So this plugin I'm using is, it's called BOD by TSC Audio, and it is basically a Sans amp simulating plugin. If I don't have a real Sans amp, or the bass player doesn't have like a real grungy, dirty type of bass tone, like this one obviously didn't, I like to put this on, just add a little bit of crunch, so that'll give a little more top end in the bass guitar, so you hear it in the mix. I'm not doing this to change his tone, but what I'm doing is adding just a tiny bit of crunch to make the bass guitar cut through. This would be essentially doing the same thing as copying the bass guitar to a separate track and then just making that the crunchy track and making it so distorted you can't understand what it's doing. You're just adding distortion to it. What I'm doing here is basically blending those two tracks just on one. I'm just not copying the bass track. So I'm getting my final mix of the original bass guitar and a little bit of crunchy tone on the same track with one plugin. That's all I'm doing. Because listen to it, like when you hear it, you hear how like thin and I don't want to say boring, but you want to like, you don't, it doesn't sound like in your face. So that's what I'm doing with this. So let's go to that song that I really liked that they play near the end. Yeah, this is that song. Okay. In my soul. Okay, so that sounds great. That sounds roughly of what I'm looking for as far as a bass tone goes for hard rock and metal. So now let's get to compression, because this bass player is all over the place as far as dynamics wise with the way he's playing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with the way that the bass player plays here. There's also nothing wrong with the clarity of the recording. So his bass sounds great. So let's just get it to where it's nice and even with the rest of the hits. And to do that, we're going to load up my favorite virtual mix rack. If the bass player knows what he's doing, the mids are already pretty scooped out, and you have a nice, clean, defined bass tone. So that's what we're going to do with this. I'm going to do two different types of compression for the bass. I'm going to do one where I'm going to let a little bit of the attack through and take care of the middle part of it. And then I'm going to add another compressor on top of that to just take care of the peaks in the wave channels. So that's what we're going to do with this. And I feel like if you add two compressors, both doing equal amounts of little bit of work versus one compressor that's doing a whole lot of work, the two compressors sound a lot better. And of course, the compressor I'm doing is the Slate version of the classic Distressor compressor. This thing sounds fantastic on bass guitars. It sounds fantastic on almost anything, but bass guitar, boy, does this thing work wonders. Okay, so we got the bass guitar all taken care of now. So let's, as far as compression goes, so let's now do the EQ trick of getting the bass guitar and the kick drum sitting well together. Let's find a song where they're both playing relatively easier rhythms. Okay, so remember how I said in a previous video how I personally like to have the kick drum have all the sub lows and the bass cut off a little bit above that? For this band, I think I'm not going to do that. I think the bass of this band needs to be really defined in the low end, and I think I'm going to be a little less aggressive with my high pass filter on the bass guitar. Right now, it sounds better if I cut it off at 40 hertz versus my usual 70, which is what I normally do for bass. But again, we'll see later on when I revisit this if this is a good decision or not. And you're going to see firsthand if this is a good decision or not. But right now, this sounds pretty good to me. So the final thing that I'm going to do, well, first, let me explain what I did with this. For the bass guitar and the kick, I found the defined frequencies of each instrument. For the kick, it was around 66 hertz. And for the bass guitar, it was about 120 hertz. I know that's 120 hertz because for some reason that's just not doing that. So that's a little buggy right there. So I raised 2 dB on the bass guitar fundamental frequency, and I took out 66 on the bass. And I did the exact opposite on the kick drum. I raised 66 and I took out 2 dB at 120. So you have 4 dB of gain and reduction on both the bass and the kick. So each instrument has their own fundamental frequency range to have their own place in the overall mix. If you're listening on phones or small laptop speakers, you won't hear that much of a difference, but if you put on headphones or listen on big speakers, you will hear the difference. So now the final thing that we're going to do, the step 3 of my foolproof low-end trick is we're going to put one final compressor on the bass guitar. But hold on, we already put 2 compressors on the bass guitar. Let's not panic here. This is not compressing the overall signal of the bass. What we're going to do is sidechain it. So for this, the stock compressor in Logic is fine. I want fast attack, and I want around 10 millisecond release just so I can get the transient of the kick drum to pop through. So 2-to-1 ratio, makeup, I'll go, makeup I'm not even going to use. And we're just going to go until you hear about 2 dB of gain reduction. Again, we're not going to go crazy here. Sidechain of the kick. So now whenever the kick drum hits is when the compressor is going to activate. So now just to show you in detail of what this is doing, I'm going to put the threshold all the way down so you hear and see what the effect is doing. You see how the kick drum hits, the bass guitar gets brought down in volume automatically? That's what we're doing. Of course, not at this aggressive rate. We're going to go about, like I said, 2-3 dB tops. Okay, now let's listen in full context. Yeah, so now that's a clearly defined low end. And now that I'm listening to this a little bit longer now, I'm going to put on the, I'm going to use an EQ on the snare drum just to deal with that harshness of the cymbals a little bit. And for that, I like to actually use the expander mode on the Pro MB. Like I said, I don't want to kill all of the hi-hat bleed. I want to just control it. And this, even though this was a good snare drum recording, there's still a lot of high end in the hi-hat bleed. So what I did was I used the Pro MB as a essentially a multi-band noise gate. You put it in expand mode, you put the range all the way down, you do the fastest attack you can, you look ahead about 5-6 milliseconds, and you have a release just so you get the transient of the snare drum, so that when the drummer hits the snare, the high end from the snare comes through and then it quickly goes back down for the hi-hat bleed. That's essentially what we did here. Let's do a quick before and after. So here's before. And now here's with it on. You still hear the hi-hat. You still hear a little bit of that hi-hat bleeding over, which is what we need because, again, we do not have a hi-hat mic on this set, so we want to hear that hi-hat. But it's not overbearing. Let's listen in context with the mix. What we have so far. Here's with it off. With it on. It's much more pleasing to the ears, so you can hear it. You can still hear the hi-hat. There's still hi-hat bleed, but it's not crazy. And that's what we were going for. By the way, to answer another commenter in the previous episode, why do I mix in mono? Why haven't I panned anything yet? The reason for that is I know I kind of criticized Graham of Recording Revolution earlier in the video I didn't really even criticize him. I just disagreed with how he handles his live tracks. But I learned this from Graham, and it's the most important mix lesson I think I've ever learned. And so I really genuinely want to thank Graham for this. I mix in mono, and panning the tracks is almost the very last thing I do when finalizing a mix. And the reason for that is I hear everything crammed down the middle. If I can get it sounding good where everything is pan center and I can still hear everything with it pan center, when I pan it, that's going to make it sound infinitely better. So not only will it be nicer in stereo, but you'll be able to clearly hear everything when I pan it. So that's why I don't pan any of my tracks until the very end. And honestly, other than the guitars and the toms, I'm not really going to pan anything in this session anyway. So if I can get the guitars, which are two completely different amps, two different miking setups, the guitars I'm not worried about, the drums I'm clearly not worried about, and the bass has its own setup in the upper mids and the low end. Kick drum has its own defining moment in the defining frequency in the low end. The only thing that I'm really going to be focusing on is getting the center vocal to blend with everything. So that's let's actually hear everything that we have now with the vocal.
In my mind, in my heart, in my soul, feeling lost, no control.
Yeah, that sounds really nice and clean. I'm very happy with where this is going. So, we got EQ and compression done on the drums, the bass, and the keyboards. Let's get the guitars finalized. Because we only took out frequencies. We didn't boost anything in the guitars, which honestly, these guitars, they sound pretty good as they are. So I'm probably not going to need to do anything with this. But let's experiment. Let's see what we can do. And trial and error, we may find something that we really like and keep it. I just saved the session, so if I royally screw this up, I just saved the session, so if I royally screw this up, we have a backing point where we could just reset and come back to this point. So let's go to where that guitar player is not doing any weird effects. So we just want him to be... We want him here. This is good. Good starting point. So let's go to Virtual Mix Rack. I like to use the FGA for guitars. I just think that this adds really nice, sharp tone. And for this guitar player, his tone sounds great. So let's see if we can improve on it. Okay, not a lot done to the vocalist guitar, Pete's. We're not doing a lot to his guitar, but Onyx's guitar, that's another story. Right away, it sounds a little boxy, so we're gonna need to do something to correct that.
In my mind, in my heart, in my soul. Feeling lost, no control. Long the door. He lies down there waiting in those bloody tears.
I also just realized there's a dim switch on Logic. I just remember this. So when I dim it, I'm going to dim it in Logic so you guys can hear it quieter with me.
Take my pain away. Rain doesn't fall down the same. This air I breathe, so different too. Because of you. She knows what I like. Lost, no control. Walk away, walk away, walk away. No more heat, no more rage. Walk away, walk away, walk away. Walk away, walk away, walk away. No more heat, no more rage. Walk away, walk away. Walk away.
That sounds nasty. And other than reverb, I think I'm pretty good with where the instruments are. And I think that's where we're going to stop today. Because my ears are starting to get a little tired from blasting those guitars pretty loud. We're going to tackle the vocals on the next episode and then follow that with reverb. So subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and look forward to those videos. I look forward to seeing you guys in the comment section, because I love reading what you guys type in that comment section, and I try to respond to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for subscribing, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.